Join the Oasis Network, the official newsletter by Darren Sparks, and stay up to date on the Omniverse. Subscribe now and get an exclusive science fiction short story sent to your inbox. Find all available episodes of the Chronicles of Calamity, the exciting young adult science fiction and cosmic horror series by Darren Sparks, exclusively through Kindle and Kindle Unlimited.
Our guest today is prolific science fiction author Glynn Stewart, who is the author of Starship's Mage, a fantastic series. He's also known for other series such as the Duchy of Terra, Castle Federation, Exile, urban fantasy series like ONSET and Changeling Blood, and right now he happens to have over 60 titles to his name. When I say prolific, I really mean this man is prolific. Everybody welcome Glynn Stewart to the show.
So, all right, I have to ask the obligatory origin story, right? So, because I've been following you for years, and I think I got the first Starship's Mage book on like a Kindle deal or something, and I was like traveling, and it was just like, okay, let's do it. And I remember by the time I got off the plane, I had just tore through the whole thing, and I was like, all right, we got to get a second one. So I've been in love with this series for years. I think it's groundbreaking in a lot of ways. You did some really cool stuff, and I have some things I want to ask you about. But I want to start with, where did you come from? Like, how did you get started? First of all, self-publishing, it ain't easy. Second of all, you're doing it in a way that you've created a business that a lot of other self-publishers are looking at right now. You've inspired me to take that on as well. So you've created this thing that I think is really cool. And so where did it start? How did it begin? Like, what's your origin story?
So I started writing in high school. I think a lot of people of our generation and so forth did. And I had finished my first couple novels in the first year of university and had an agent that I'd met through an online forum, but nothing really came of that. So I went off and became an accountant. Quite successful accountant at that. But my partner read some of the stuff that I had written, and they really, really loved it. And they were pushing me to try this whole, KDP thing, Kindle Direct Publishing, that existed. This was 2013, because we were first talking about it on our honeymoon in 2013. So, and then from that, I had a novella at the time I had a short story at the time that I was trying to turn into a novella. And I turned it into a novella, and that became episode 1 of Starship's Mage. And we put that out December 15th, 2013. And so, as regular as clockwork, every 3 months, touch stressful because I was working full time as a quite senior financial analyst at the time, we put out another novella. So at the end of the year, end of 2014, we had 5 novellas out, and I'd put out one of the fantasies I'd written, and it had landed with a wet flop. Which is fair. It is, in my opinion, the weakest of my works. And we then went on, and at the end of December of 2014, we put out the Starship's Mage Omnibus, what's now Starship's Mage Book 1. And we then turned around in about May and realized that Starship's Mage just paid the down payment on our new house, which was a heck of a place to be. And then over the summer, we put out more books, and I suddenly had the moment where I was sitting there looking at a promotion to head up the financial planning and analysis department for a mid-sized condo developer in downtown Calgary, or I could go write full-time. And I was an accountant. I was a forecast analyst. So I sat down and I crunched the numbers. And I realized I would actually make more money if I sustained even like half of the success I'd had on Space Carrier Avalon and Starship's Mage writing.
Yeah.
And it turned out I underestimated.
So Starship's Mage, did it start off as a series of short stories and novellas that became the omnibus? Is that how that works?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there were 5 episodes, which are now, well, it's still 5 episodes. I haven't really changed the text at all, combining into the original Starship's Mage book. You can tell, I know you can tell, reading the book, that it was written as 5 novellas. But
I mean, yes, I did just review it again. So I did just happen to move through it again. And there was one thing that was just like, oh, he's explaining this, and it's not like ad nauseum at all, but you explain something and I went, why is he doing that again? And then I realized, oh, it's an omnibus, and then I had to go so that's like that was that one time that I noticed it, and I think I've gone through it 3 times. So I didn't it's not like a heavy thing at all.
The hilarious one for me, and the one that actually made us eventually take the individual episodes down, was some poor person, read episode 1, novella 1, book 2, Hand of Mars, and then went back and read episode 3 thinking that was book 3.
Oh.
They were very confused.
Very confusing. Yeah, that wouldn't work.
So, I mean, that was the point when I saw that review, that was the point where we went and took the original individual episodes down. Because I wanted to leave them up so people could still get them in that format, but I realized it was probably causing more confusion than anything else. And frankly, if you know anything about Amazon, you know that Amazon gives a 70% royalty between $2.99 and $9.99, and 35% outside of that. So the 99-cent novellas will cost more for someone to buy them like that than it costs them to buy the omnibus. I got less money.
Yeah. It's a whole interesting thing. I think it was very smart to do the omnibus. Okay, so I grew up with sci-fi as something that my father was super into. My parents were Trekkies. They were like at one point the presidents of the local chapter of the fan club, and I have Spock ears when I was a kid. But it was one of those things that like your parents are into, so you're not necessarily going to get into it. I rejected it. But I grew up and I didn't realize how much of an impact science fiction had on me, just because of my parents and because of the way that I was brought up.
My parents were huge Trekkies,
so you understand this. And this is probably where at least for me, where my love of science fiction comes from. So for me, writing it was this like far off thought that I maybe one day, and I write other things and I'm published in other things, and like it's this idea of, well, I know I've got a solid thing over here, and if I keep working towards what the goal had been, right, then I probably will be successful, and it's going to be okay because I can just keep doing that. But then there's this science fiction stuff that keeps popping up, and so for me, I know that I love the idea of looking into humanity's future, and hopefully we've gotten our crap together in a way that allows us to rise to our potential. And I love stories that show that. And what I was surprised about which, you know what? No, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop right there before I ask you a question about the series. And I just want to know, science fiction, what does science fiction mean to you? Why is it something that you chose to like? I mean, books take a long time to write. There's a lot of energy that goes into this. Why is science fiction the genre that you've chosen to sink your teeth into and devote so much creative energy?
It is what I grew up reading. So, like I said, my parents were Trekkies. I grew up on a steady diet of Star Trek, then Stargate, then Firefly, and all of that jazz. There was always an evening it was the family tradition that one evening a week we sat down with a frozen pizza that we'd made, and we sat down in front of the TV and we watched an episode of something sci-fi. So we saw Space Above and Beyond, Firefly, all of Stargate, so on and so forth. So it's like science fiction was always very much something I was immersed in, and I never stopped being immersed in it. So it was my go-to genre for all media ever, basically. And so when I started to write, the first thing I wrote was the first novel I completed was science fiction. And no one will ever see that because it doesn't have the serial numbers filed off sufficiently hard from being David Weber fan fiction. Then I wrote a fantasy. Then I wrote a sci-fi. Then I wrote a fantasy. As in current thing. Mostly I write science fiction. I keep trying to sneak fantasy in, but it doesn't necessarily do as well as I'd like.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. So let's talk about Starship's Mage, because it is science fiction fantasy.
It is.
And it's delicious science fiction fantasy. I don't want to give spoilers away, but it's a huge universe. There's a lot going on with it.
16 novels.
Yeah, goodbye, right? Like, so, and I imagine
16
there's more
novel
coming, especially
and
with
2 novellas. So the second
Yeah.
one hasn't been released yet.
And is there a spinoff? I mean, because I'm trying to read.
3 of the novels are a spinoff. So the Red
Okay.
Falcon trilogy is a spinoff.
Yeah. So
It was meant to be one character's story. Another character took it over and then inserted herself back into the main series.
And did a good job at it. I love Kelly, right? Kelly. My brain is I'm sizzled right now. But
Yeah, it was supposed to be Maria and David's story, and it very much became Kelly's story. That's that trilogy.
And Kelly, I will tell you. So let's start with Damien, because Damien kicks off the series, and he is. At first I was like, oh, we have this kind of Harry Potter in space right after Harry graduates from Hogwarts. Like, that was.
He's this very nebbish little self-insert.
Yes. And he's this diminutive kind of creature moving through, trying to find his place. And he quickly ends up in a situation where he realizes he's not going to have the break that some of these other people are going to have. In fact, he's going to get kind of the crap end of the stick. And so he ends up on a ship full of characters that, if you like Firefly, you probably will like the energy there that the original crew has. And then there's this amazing story that unfolds about Damien's special ability, even among mages, and it just becomes this incredible thing. So when you were building the world, when you were thinking about what was going to make these mages different than probably what people were used to when it comes to mages, and we don't have to get into the super secrets, but I do want to ask you. So you got this idea that, hey, mages are responsible for things like faster than light travel in this universe, and that is something that's, I think, pretty badass, and not in the way that Dune does it, where you've got this like trippy thing going on with the floating. He's really like a dragony worm thing, and he goes through bubbles and cool stuff. You've got hardcore. There is stuff going on. There is magic being used, and it is warping space, time, matter, and energy, and it's a really cool, beautiful thing. So I want to ask you about the mages in the universe. What gave you the inspiration when you were creating the mages and kind of how the magic worked?
It started from I blame TV tropes for this, and the trope is a wizard did it, and it's a basically for when the explanation for why a technological solution in something like Star Trek is just bullshit. It's just not actually any attempt at being real or reliable or anything like that. So you end up with, it might as well have been a wizard. It ends up being the trope. So I went, well, why not make it a wizard? And then from there, I kind of built, knowing what I wanted in terms of the faster than light travel and how that worked, I built out what kind of magic they had. And then I think I had the idea of Damien and his not being able to get the right kind of job. Before I really had much more of the setting. Like, I'd have to go look and find the original short story. I'm pretty sure I have it somewhere. That started everything, and it's all there. A lot of it is there in terms of the setting, but I do a lot of my world building on the go. I start from a point and I build out what the world building needs to be to support that point. What I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to tell. What I'm trying to say. It's not like I'm out here with some grand message I'm trying to get across to everybody.
But you've got some grand messages in there, and I quite love them. So Damien is this character who gets plunged into a whole mess of stuff that he had no intention of getting caught up in. He just wanted to go kind of find a place to squat and kind of figure out what was next as he was becoming an adult. And he gets thrust into this really beautiful story.
He just wanted to be a ship's mage.
He just wanted to be a ship's mage. And so in this universe, you've got mages who are who have and this is addressed pretty early on, and it's a very important theme throughout your series. But
Mage
the
by blood and
mages,
mage by right.
yes, and so we've got this idea of mage by blood, mage by right, and the dark history of where mages came from. Because you didn't just say mages have always been here and this is a thing, and no, you're saying something happened to bring what we identify as magic into this universe. Do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, so if you pay attention to it, it's strongly implied in the setting that mages have always existed in humanity. But the basic standard mage, with kind of the one half of the gift, so to speak, without training has no idea what they're doing. And will just be that little bit luckier, that little bit more intuitive, in a little bit more in tune than everyone else around them. So it's when you end up with the people who have the second half of the gift, the ability to see and manipulate, to see what they're doing with magic. And you end up with those individuals who are still extraordinarily rare in the Starship's Mage setting. They would have been able to wield real magic in our history. They would have been, without the stuff that created the mages in the Starship's Mage setting, that they would have been weaker than the mages available there. But we would have had people capable of doing magic in our history. Because I feel like there's enough legends and oddities that makes some degree of sense as a storytelling structure anyway. But what happened in the Starship's Mage setting was a cult of absolute irredeemable asswipes decided to engage in a forced breeding program. And among other things, one of their forced breeding programs was an attempt to create psychics, superhumans, whoever you want to look at. And they had some tools that allowed them to pick up the magical gift in humans. And they used that and some grotesque practices, let's call it, to breed magic back into humanity at the cost of basically murdering thousands of children. Teenagers, usually, at the point they were killed, but kind of... People have asked why I don't go back and write it, and it's like, I really do not want to get into these people's heads. I can write what they did, but I do not want to write who they are, if that makes sense. They are not nice people, and I don't want to be in their heads.
Yeah.
They're not.
No, it sounds... It's chilling. I mean, when you do touch on it, it is chilling. That's absolutely chilling. Yeah, especially when... Yeah. So sorry, continue.
And basically, they spend... there's about I can't remember the exact timeline, but it's most of a century... Earth and Mars are in a state of extended Cold War. Not even Cold War, so it's hot war. They basically takes each side 20 years to build an actual force capable of throwing it at the other one. And the Genesis have taken over Mars, and Earth is trying to dislodge them and failing. And then Earth finally thinks they've pulled it off, and the Genesis pull magic out of a hat. Literally. Well, not out of a hat, but they meet the last assault force from Earth with mages, and they kick the crap out of the assault force from Earth and are about to take over. And then a gentleman who later goes by Desmond Michael Alexander, who was one of their test subjects, escapes, takes over, and honestly wipes out the Genesis. He's not a nice person either, but he sets up the Protectorate and the Kingdom of Mars and the Royal Martian Navy, and all the stuff that we see in the books are set up by Desmond, who is the first Mage King of Mars.
Yeah. And Mage King of Mars happens to be my Twitch tag, everybody. That's how you can find me. For me, the story of the original Desmond is this like incredible... It was sad and it was intense when we got there in the story, and
enough information there to realize that Desmond Michael Alexander was an incredibly broken man for his entire life.
Yes, and that was the
incredibly traumatized man.
Oh, and it really... It gives you... I mean, you have to read it to really to get into it, folks. It's you can very easily find it. We've got links down below. It's on Amazon. That's where I found it. And there's audiobooks, which are great. So if you've got ADHD like me and you need that, then use it. But that's that part of the story. It's like rooted in everything. I mean, everything really starts from this rebellion and then the establishment of the Protectorate. And so what I find I really love about the series, you've got magic that's beautifully woven into technology, and specifically, can we talk about the simulacrum? Can we talk
Yep.
about that? Okay, because I freaking loved this idea, and I write like spiritual nonfiction, and I actually took the idea of the simulacrum and I added it as as like an exercise for people to use to help them process things. So, like seriously, it was like this. That's really badass, and
Yeah.
I had never thought of that before. I've never even considered this idea. So, the simulacrum. So, in the ship, at the center of the ship, there is this perfect replica of
Yeah.
the ship.
And it's sufficiently perfect that I think at one point they're literally using it for damage control.
Yes,
in one of the books, because it actually replicates the damage. This semi-liquid silver model that, depending on the ship, I think it varies from about 1 to 100 to 1 to 500 scale, sits at the exact center of the ship. It's linked into the runes that are woven throughout the entire starship, and it mirrors the ship. And because of that structure, without that simulacrum and its runic matrix, a mage can't jump a ship. A mage can teleport himself a few thousand kilometers, but he needs that structure to actually teleport a ship, and to teleport a ship far enough for it to actually be worthwhile.
And there's limitations to how far they can jump. So usually a ship
pretty consistently, like even with the unusually powerful mages, it's pretty consistently 1 light year. There's a number of reasons for that. Some of it is just that's what they're trained to calculate.
Yeah, well, because calculation, there's math involved. I mean, there is. It's like, there's the mages have to be scientists as well, and that's what I also I love about it. It's so.
And so you run into the point of the story where Damien is no longer a jump mage, but he remains one of the galaxy's foremost experts on teleportation magic. Which really screws up some people's days when they run into
it. Does. It really does. It really does. So this is a series that for me, it just hooked me right back into reading science fiction, because again, I had, I've seen I'll see every TV thing, I'll see all the movies
recently.
Murderbot has been mind-blowing, and I was like, Murderbot, really? And but okay, because it was getting so many hits and people were talking about it, and there's something kind of, I don't know, cathartic about reading Murderbot that you're just kind of like, you keep going through. So
Murderbot is on my very short list of things I recommend.
So it has, speaking, I would say similarities between the two is that both stories are very fast paced. Things are very driven. There's not a lot of sitting around and waiting to figure out what's going to happen next. It's coming to us. Once we get out of that initial story that sets Damien up, he ends up going through a series of incredible things that it kind of puts him in a position of power. So he's removed from the playing field.
He gets promoted to a desk and chained to it and surrounded by bodyguards.
Yes. And I was bummed. I'm not gonna lie, because the action adventure energy that's there in the first couple of books is like, hell yeah, this is happening, and then suddenly I'm like, what are you doing to Damien? Why? I actually think at one point I tried to tweet you, and I was like, what? We need more. Please continue this. I need to. That can't be where he ends. And it wasn't, but he ends up in a position where he can't do the things, and so we get this other character that comes out and kind of
Rosalind.
Right. And so Rosalind starts running with the story in a really interesting way, because we've got the Protectorate, which, there's the mages are inside the Protectorate. They're helping run the Protectorate. And
what was that description of it? I write future, and the Protectorate's pretty exemplary of this. I write futures where things got better, but I try not to write utopias.
That's a perfect way of looking at it, because it isn't a utopia. There's still a lot of stuff going on, especially on the outside of the Protectorate, that is affecting the inside of the Protectorate and what's going on inside. So we get to a position where we're dealing with the people who don't necessarily like the idea of mages, don't necessarily like the idea of their technology being capped by magic and relying on magic in the way, because not everybody's a mage, right? So we have this.
And one of the things I am quite pleased that I think I managed was the Republic is evil. But their complaints and their problems and the issues they raise are real.
Yeah.
Every concern they raise is real, and that's part of what makes them so effective at recruiting and marshaling the resources that allow them to launch the campaign they do. That there are some very real problems they're calling out, what they tried to do about it, I mean, is evil. But
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was when we got to that part, and that was starting to explain as to how they were able to get so much power so quickly, and make the moves so quickly that they were making, completely, it felt like out of nowhere. And then once that story gets revealed, I would say that's when stuff got dark. Like, I mean, that's when the series took a really dark turn, and
there's
I loved it. I mean,
I think there's one sequence in there that is unquestionably medical horror. Like I found it, given some of the stuff that was going on in my partner's life at the time. That sequence was actually quite difficult to write because my partner at the time, they've gotten over it since, but they had a quite severe phobia of medical institutions. Made writing that sequence a bit difficult.
Yeah. No, it was
a haunted hospital in space, only worse.
Oh, way worse. Way worse. It wasn't even a hospital. And that's there's fascism there, right? There's this idea of it, actually it inspired what I'm writing with my series, the Chronicles of Calamity, the idea of there being this force out there that's going to use whoever they can for their own means, and they're not necessarily going to think of them like humans. They're not necessarily going to think of them like people. And what does that mean for the people who have to live inside of that world?
Yeah.
So it takes this really dark turn, and I'm gonna tell you right now, if you haven't read the stories and you're really into it and you want to, then you want to stop now, because I'm gonna say something that is a little bit of a spoiler. But if you're into the stories and you've read them like me, then I'm gonna say something to Mr. Stewart right now, and that is Mage brains. Like, what the was that? Like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God. And I start flipping through the pages. I'm yelling at my partner. I'm reading to them the sequence. Like, can you believe that this is so? That is when it took this cosmic horror kind of vibe to me, because the other things were implied about why that was happening and what made that.
The funniest part to me was someone sent me an email. I don't even remember what we were communicating through at the time. That someone guessed it at the end of book 5. The end of Judgment of Mars. They were going, "Oh, it's this."
No.
It was like, how? Like, yes, it's been in my head, and it's what the series has been building to since the first episode. But how?
Oh my goodness! So that was a long-term, like that was a seed that was there for you from day one.
Everything through, I think, the end of Sword of Mars. Was the original hilarious parts, the original trilogy.
Okay.
There was originally a trilogy planned. Starship's Mage, Hand of Mars, Sword of Mars. And just stuff kept sneaking in between books, and then books kept becoming 2 books, 3 books.
Yeah.
And suddenly more stuff added itself at the end, and Rosalind and Kelly decided.
Yeah. Right. And I want to talk about them too, because you've written incredibly strong, compelling female characters in a way that I have a lot of female friends and women identified friends who read those characters as badass, like borderline Tarantino-esque awesome, like women who are able to really get some shit done, regardless of whether they had intended to do that, at one point in their life or not. And so we've got Damien, who's this really great character, and he's a male lead. He's not your average male lead. He's very charming. I was a little sad that he was straight, I'm not gonna lie, because I was like, I kind of wanted to cuddle with Damien. And I still do in my dreams. But then we get it, the story shifts, and Damien becomes responsible really for not just the protectorate in some ways that he wasn't before, just because he's got a job, right? He's got a job to do. He's got to take care of some people, but he's got somebody else that he loves, that has become family to him, that he also really has to take care of. And so Damien's busy. And
he has 3 daughters, and only 2 of them are biological.
Yes. Oh, good. That's a whole thing. Yes. But yes. And so cloning and mages and importance of bloodline.
There's definitely some, given what the Mountain was doing, there's definitely some questions about how much of his wife is in his daughters.
Right. Right. But so he gets busy. So he goes and becomes daddy, and I love that for him. But I was also sad because it meant that he wasn't out there rough and tumbling and out there in the universe. But we have these two female characters that largely take that on and become our eyes and ears into what's going on inside the Protectorate and outside of the Protectorate. So when it came, sorry, go ahead.
I think it was key to a lot of that Kelly isn't a mage.
Mm-hmm.
Because Rosalind is kind of the opposite of what Damien is at the start of the first book.
Right.
At the start of the first book, Damien is a mage by right, and he's a relatively weak mage in his own basic setup. He comes into other advantages later, but in and of himself, on the normal measurements, Damien is a relatively weak mage. And he's a mage by right. He was identified by the testing that's done on every Protectorate citizen at age 12 as being a mage. He's not from a mage family. Then you have Rosalind Chambers. Rosalind Chambers is a mage by blood. She is from one of the oldest and most powerful families in the Tau Ceti system. She could trace her descent directly back to the original Eugenesis project. She is one of the more powerful normal mages in the setting. And she is, in many ways, when Damien first meets her, Damien first meets her in a jail. She's in juvie detention when he first meets her. And everything she is after that is clawing her way up from the pit she starts herself in. But at the same time, she is in power and in bloodline, she's the exact opposite of Damien. And then we have Kelly Lamont, who is literally an engineer. She is a starship engineer on Damien's first ship and ends up a spy. Spoilers. And ends up commanding a spy ship for the Protectorate during the war and all the other stuff. And these two women become the eyes into both the war and the aftermath of the war, and how the Protectorate deals with the chaos and the fallout of a major civil war, and what happens when the fallout of their civil war spills outside of the Protectorate into areas and onto people that the Protectorate didn't really consciously realize existed.
And I want to talk to that too, speak to that too, because you have a really good understanding of what that war was causing for people. It wasn't just, in a lot of books and a lot of series, it's like the point is to get to the war, and that's fine. I am a lover of space opera. I love a good space battle, and I eat that stuff up, but it neglects the idea that at the heart of it's still real people, and there's still some very real things going on. And I thought you did a great job at making sure that wasn't, looked over, right? There's
a comment on that I kind of hold as a guiding light, and it's I don't remember the context in which this was said, but it was David Weber who said it. And I think someone was asking something along the lines of, why do you kill off so many characters? Why do so many people that I love die in your books? And his response was, if good people don't die, I'm no longer writing military fiction. I'm writing military pornography. Because there has to be, because if we ignore the costs and the prices of war, we are glorifying something that should not be glorified.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we use it for entertainment and we tell adventure stories using it as a backdrop and all of this, but we need to remember that what we are writing about and in the stories we are telling are talking about possibly one of the most horrific things humanity can do to itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And so we need to recognize the price of that, and I mean, it helps to character development and so on and so forth, because these are real struggles that people have to deal with in these situations, so they become part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fantastic series. It goes, like I said, it goes into some great action-oriented places. It goes to some very dark places. You hit on, I don't know how many different subgenres. It's kind of fun to go through and count. And it's stuff that I wasn't expecting. And it fits. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not. There's no stretching. Everything really does line up. When it came,
not the Prokoskin saga. I did not sneak in a romance novel.
No, well, that's true. No, and even the romance stuff that's there, it's not dramatized, right? So it feels like these are people who this would happen, right? Like they're on a ship doing these things. of course, two human beings are going to connect and things are going to happen, and it feels very organic. Yeah, it didn't feel none of that. None of it feels forced.
I just loved. I think it was the one person in the second Red Falcon book, the one reviewer who was like, "I don't get this love triangle." Well, there's a wedding in book 3 of all 3 of them, so does that answer your question?
Exactly. Well, and so that was my thing, is that you have examples of polyamory in there, and that's something that I'm a polyamorous person, so that was very important to me to see that, and that was another section that I went out and I read to my partners, like, how cool is this? It's just, and it's not done it's so not in your face, like gross. Nothing is shoved in our faces as readers. It's just, oh, this happens to be a fact of this person's life. And
of my social circle, and that's kind of where a lot of this comes from. Is like, my social circle is a bunch of poly, bi, pan, etc. people. So that is what my characters end up dealing with too.
Yeah, and those things. So even though I remember one of the things that I usually tell people when they're looking for like queer sci-fi. Is there are some very great examples of queer sci-fi, and we, we'll do videos and other things about that later. But I recommend your books because as a queer person, I feel super comfortable in that universe. I feel I see myself represented in characters. Even though that isn't necessarily Damien's trip, that was fine because Damien had a job to do, and that's what I was there to read about. But it was being able to look out and see characters and feel represented. It was a wonderful thing. And so,
as a straight guy, it is not, I generally feel it is not my place, and I don't have the background, the information, or the exposure to write the story that is about being gay. I don't. That when we talk about own voices, that is the type of story that has to be own voices. We're talking about being gay, being bisexual, even in a metaphorical sense, that really needs to be written by someone who has those experiences. I don't have them, so I won't write that.
Right.
But it is equally wrong for me to write a universe where those people don't exist.
Yes, I would agree.
And so those people exist in my work because they exist in my life and they exist around all of us. Like, if you don't know any gay people, the truth is you do, and you're just not and you've just demonstrated that you're not safe to come out to.
Right. Yeah, pretty much. That's how that goes.
Yeah.
So it's all of that stuff is done very tastefully in your books, and it's very, again, it was nice to see representation. It was nice to have those things there as a reader who wasn't expecting it, because I don't see it. Like, especially in science fiction. Science fiction is still very much skews towards a certain lens, and it's hard to, especially series like this that are so easy to read. They definitely tend to be pushed towards a certain audience, and I didn't feel that. I mean, I blew through these books. I wait for the next one. I mean, it's I'm a pre-order guy, like, so I feel, I don't care who you are, you're going to find somebody in the stories that you're going to relate to, and that's what I tell people. So, like again, when my queer friends are like, hey, where should I start? I'm like, you should check this out because you probably like it. And it's not like, it's something that the story centers around. Because here's my thing: as a queer person, I've had enough trauma around that subject. I do not need to read about it again, and that's my other thing, is I want to get away from it. I just want to see somebody who's gotten through it too, and it's not a deal for them. And that was awesome.
Gay Space Dads Forever was fun to read.
Yeah, Gay Space Dads Forever. What is that? What that went over my head. Gay Space Dads Forever.
Scattered Stars Evasion.
Okay. I haven't read this. Have I read this? This is something I've read.
It is the second of the 2 Scattered Stars series I'm writing.
Oh, there you go. I haven't started Scattered Stars. Okay. That is
Scattered Stars Evasion.
Okay.
Scattered Stars Evasion has a gay lead, a gay male lead.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. So
and he adopts a kid, and he marries his navigator, and they are gay space dads together forever.
Okay, then I have to read this. That's how that's going to go. I will say you are kind of prolific with your writing. I guess I'll poke you about it now. You're pumping out a lot of books. You're pumping out a lot of content, and it's something that I like, because of course I like the book. So I'm enjoying it, but there's a lot to get into, and I know that when it comes to, so Starship's Mage is there more coming with Starship's Mage, or are we? No, you're like, oh no, there's still stuff to do. And then you've got the Duchy of Terra, which is
yeah.
okay. That's sexy too. That's super sexy. You have really fun aliens in
Yes.
that series. You have super duper fun aliens. And that's a whole other thing to chew on. And so how many series are you working on? How many series are there actively?
I am currently working on have not like the Scattered Stars Conviction and Scattered Stars Evasion, their last books have been written but have not been published.
Okay.
So I'm currently working on Starship's Mage, Dakotan Confederacy, Aether Spheres, Peacekeepers of Soul. I'm currently working on 4 series. I am starting a 5th sometime this year.
Oh goodness!
Just finished 2.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was up at 6, and I might be missing 1 in there.
Right, because it's normal to have lots of things on the burner. What is? Well, I mean, because obviously, like, you're selling books and you're making money and you're able to like have a life and support yourself and your family and how important that is. And I appreciate that. But there's something else that's keeping you coming back, and there's something else that keeps you going with writing science fiction. And again, it's pretty prolifically because we have multiple series and they're juicy. Like I don't feel like when I was waiting for more Starship's Mage and I went over to Duchy of Terra, I did not feel that was diminished. I didn't feel like I was like it was like a money grab. I didn't feel like any of it. And sometimes you do. Sometimes you just feel like the author's feeding you stuff so that you don't go away. I did not feel like that. It was an instant like, holy shit, there's some fun stuff going. So like you're writing these juicy stories. You're obviously, you really care about this stuff. So what keeps you coming back to science fiction, writing these stories and creating new series?
I have to make payroll. There's the joke that Stephen King once said, I don't have writer's block, I have a mortgage. I can't have writer's block, I have to make payroll. Outside of that, this is where my brain lives, like 24/7. I have a frolicking, fertile field of plot bunnies that won't stop procreating. So I always have some new shiny idea that wants to get written. And I can't write fast enough to get all my ideas out. I can't. So I write as much as I can to get the ideas that I can out. And, no, I really like what I do. It is my full-time job. So obviously I have like 3 people working full-time to support me doing this as my full-time job. Part of how I put out a book as often as I do. Yeah. I do none of the publishing side of it at this point.
That's good. That's nice.
But it's basically, it's like, this is where my brain lives. These are the stories that rattle around the back of my head. And yeah, I love what I do. And I really want to tell them, and I really want to tell these stories. And I have more stories I want to tell.
Yeah. An artist on fire. I love it. And you can tell because it's again, everything's so juicy and everything's very creative and it's very fun. And so, for me, when I was,
where does that go?
I was looking. Oh yeah.
Those 2 shells.
That's all
of them.
Oh, that's sexy. That's very sexy. That's super awesome.
I have 1 copy of everything over there.
Yeah. And it's quite a wonderful catalog, and I'm looking forward to more coming and where you're headed with those things. If you were, because there are so many people who, especially right now, are tackling this idea of, hey, I want to write and I want to do the self-publishing thing and all of that stuff. I feel lucky because I came from a traditional publishing background, and so like I feel like I have my fingers in places other people's can't, and I've been very fortunate, right, in my journey as an author. But when it came to self-publishing for me, I was like, I don't know, do I need to do this? Do I want to do this? And for me, it was I want more control over the final say so and things and whatnot. Yeah. So diving in because of that was my inspiration. But there's a lot of people I'm finding who they want to write, they are self-conscious, and so they think maybe self-publishing is a way to get into conquering those fears. There are people who want to make a side income because they are at that point, especially nowadays, it's a gig economy, right? So people want side income. And then there's the people who are they have an art
and they want to experience that art, right? So you have all these different types that come to writing, that come to science fiction, right? And they want to do what you're doing, right? And it's one of those things that it's hard to talk about, because how do you talk about doing what you do? Because you just do your thing, and you solved problems when they came up, and so on and so forth. But if you could go back to 2013, and you could talk to that first you who was writing and producing and taking this seriously and wanting to dive in, what piece of information would you give that past version of you from the information you have now? Like, what would be that one thing that you'd be like, oh, you need to know this, and if you know this, you're going to be fine? What would that one thing be?
The best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago. And the second best time is today. The best time to self-publish on Amazon was about 2009. I missed that boat. In 2013, I was not the first. No, I was after about, I'd say, the third spike in difficulty of getting an audience on Amazon. So it had gone up from here to here to here to here when I was on it, and I'd say it's probably had 3 more spikes since, and it's probably going to have more. And that's part of that is just the sheer quantity of people. I'd say we're probably going through one of those spikes right now with people putting AI written work up. And AI, and there's a distinction I will draw between stuff that's written completely by AI and stuff where authors are using AI for assistance in drafting out, like at the paragraph and sentence level. I'm not a big fan of either personally, but I understand. But the latter I will at least accept as you are still writing the book yourself. But there is a bunch of stuff that is just being straight up written by AI and uploaded onto Amazon right now. Or language learning models. I don't like to call them AI because they're not. And so the sooner you get into this, the better off you are. So what I did in 2013, 14, 15 wouldn't work today. Just straight up wouldn't work. So there are a lot of people out there who are keeping a pulse on what it takes to break in. And you can find them if you look. 20 books to 50K is, I'm told, a good group. I've never been a member of it myself, but people I respect say that it is a good place to find that information. And I would say that what you want to do is you want to find those sources of information. You want to build and to get that support in that community. But the biggest thing is getting out there is the biggest thing you can do. But you also have to get out there with something worth reading. Like, it's the hard thing of you have to write a bunch of crap before you have something that people are going to want to read. And so you really need, but you have to write that crap. And I mean, it's not even crap, it's a learning experience. So what you need is someone you trust to tell you that it's ready. And you need to be able to pay enough attention to assess what you need to, where you need to do the work. Like, so the book needs to exist and it needs to be a good book. Then you need a good cover. You need a decent editor. These are all things that you need now, where some of them were more optional 8 years ago. Even the good book from some of the things I read on Kindle at the time. But I can't admit to that in public. I will not give examples of that, let's say.
Right.
And so it's harder now than it was, but it will be harder still in the future. So it's like, the first thing, it is necessary to get out there and get that book and start building that audience, start building that mailing lists and all of these things. But you also need to make sure that what you're putting out there is, I don't like the term minimum viable product, because it implies that it is, minimum, but it is, when I say minimum viable, it's like it's got to be a certain level of well-written. It's got to have a certain level of editing. It's got to have a certain level of cover. And these are things that you need to be immersed in the genre and the genre tropes and what's being published and sold to really get a feel for what you need. And unfortunately, we are currently in an era where it is extremely difficult for a small and medium publisher not to be inherently predatory. Because they can't do anything for you that you can't do for yourself.
Right.
That does not mean that they are predatory. but it means that they have to put a lot of effort into not being, because their fundamentally their business model is doing for you what you can do for yourself.
Right.
So unless they have specific skills, specific markets, specific information that you don't have, and that is the value that they provide, where you can, if you find the right publisher and they're giving you the right value, potentially it's worth it. I wouldn't do it myself. I basically would say that if you can't get a big publisher to take on your book, you're better off self-publishing than going with a small publisher. But that's my point of view, having built a publisher from scratch that works for me.
Right.
So,
Yeah. No, and that is exactly the kind of advice. Say it one more time.
I have some heavy survivor bias. I survived and have been successful.
I love it. No, I mean, it's yeah. That's the kind of information we want. That's the kind of stuff that actually helps. It isn't just, write your book and you'll be okay and just do the thing. It's like, no, there's more to doing the thing than you think there is.
There's a bunch of stuff around writing the book. Writing the book is not easy. Right. But the sad truth of the matter is your first book is probably no more publishable than mine was.
Yep. I had 3 attempts at writing a book before I finally got a book published, and the first 3 were just, we don't talk about. They're fine. And
we've all got one of those.
Yeah, and it is okay.
Novel is one of those. I have a bunch of starts.
Yeah. Oh, I have. Especially when I was reading the Starship's Mage and I got all up in it, and I started playing with this idea of like, okay, I could write fiction. I when I was a kid, I wrote a lot of fiction, and I did pretty well. I won some local things and whatever, but I didn't have confidence as a writer because I didn't go to college for it. I didn't go to school for it afterwards. And so I had this idea in my head that I had to create like intense literature. And if I was
an accountant,
boom. Well, and so I
did not go to university for this stuff.
Yeah, right. So exactly. Right. And so that was my thing, is as I learned more about you and I was stalking you online and I love your website revamp because it was super helpful. But it's going through and learning more about you, being like, okay, well, this guy's doing this thing and he seems to be doing okay. And his books are good. Like I like his stuff. And so I started paying attention to other people in the genre, other people who were doing something similar, and just kind of realizing that there wasn't any reason not to.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it was, I look at, I'm lucky enough, I have 6 books published. And so I'm at that point where I was like, well, I'm done writing nonfic. I want to go write something else now. And what would that be? And I had fallen in love with Starship's Mage. And my idea really was like, oh, this guy isn't writing like intense literature that's hard to absorb. He's writing these really digestible, exciting, like they're I don't want to call them thrillers because they're not thrillers, but you're thrilled the entire time. Yeah, boom.
I write popcorn action fiction. I have no bones about what I write. I don't pretend I'm writing high literature. The themes in my books are not accidental, but they're certainly not front and center. And I am, I'm a pulp writer, basically.
Yeah. Well, and so that was my thing.
Not using that as any sort of derogatory, just to
it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. There's a tradition in science fiction of pulp. Right. Yeah. And so that was my takeaway from kind of following your career for a couple of years was it because again, you're pumping out all this material. And I wasn't hip on the whole, this is how you do the KDP thing. I wasn't hip on any of that. So I didn't understand the importance of having regular content and things coming out. So I just was like, this guy's
fun.
Oof. Yeah, no, the getting geared up, getting everything wound up to do this the way that you're doing it had to have been you've had to have rebuilt your entire world just to make this all happen the way that it did.
My entire life, my partner's entire life is structured around getting me in front of the keyboard.
Yeah.
The success is variable. I just got an ADHD diagnosis, so that's going to be interesting.
Me too. And I'm learning how to do books with that in my head now. Yeah, it's going to be fun. it also, my thing with it was because I just got my diagnosis about 6 months ago, and everything went click, click, click.
2.5 hours.
2.5 hours ago? Or there you go. So it's
when I say
everything makes sense.
Just.
Yeah. Everything started to make sense in a way that I suddenly had this no excuses but explanations for things, and about the way I focus and the way that I get work done, because I have to obsess over the way I get a book done isn't by writing little bits of it for 4 hours a day and putting it away. The way that I get a book done is spending the 2 weeks before a deadline just obsessing about it, and then it's beautiful and it's amazing because I work really well under pressure. But I realize as I'm getting older, I can't rely on that. That is not healthy. That is very
That is
bad.
what I'm currently trying to get away from. Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
The ADHD diagnosis, it just put things in perspective of so I can work with this and I can find a way to kind of hack it. And that's when
I've put a bunch of structures together to around that without knowing that necessarily that was what I was working around.
Yep.
But I definitely have
You've already been
doing look at that shelf of 60 books over there and not say that I have got at least some functioning accommodations for myself.
Right. No, I mean, because it's ADHD is not what people. It's like when we were kids, we thought it was something very different than what we're as an adult, what I know it is. And it's kind of a superpower in its own way if you let it be,
manage it,
and so I try to just let it be a superpower. I'm fairly successful for being somebody with having as much of it as I do, and I'm doing okay, and it's something that I'm really getting excited about. I know it's so weird to say I'm excited about my ADHD, but I didn't know.
Like I said, I've had the diagnosis for less than 3 hours. So at the point we're recording this, so that's certainly something I'm still absorbing.
Yeah,
but it's not at the same time. It's not really news. It's kind of I kind of figured.
Yeah,
I'd be paying enough attention that I knew what I was getting, so to speak. So,
this exactly. Yeah, and it's a whole thing. It's going to be great. It's going to work out, and things are going to be way better because you're going to understand things. And so, yay! And more people need to go. Yeah, but more people need to figure it out, because once you do, then it's I used to carry this anxiety around and I didn't understand it. And then I got the diagnosis, and then it was that night I was going, okay, so this is what I do. And I need to, and I had my conversation with my partners about hey, all right, so that how I just won't shut the fuck up, and I'll just I'll just tell a story from the very beginning of its impetus to the very end, and how I can't make decisions when we go to the grocery store, and so it turns out that's ADHD, and I'm so sorry, and just having that moment of this is who I am though, so what are we going to do about it, and how does it affect you, does it not? And then that turned into the conversation of how does this affect me as a creator and as somebody who is a creative. And that was hard because I started to realize that, again, I relied on it, and I had created systems to get through, and they worked. I mean, they were working, but then there was that, how healthy is that? And how good is that? So that's, I'm in that process too. And it's honestly, it's been so freaking relieving in its own way. And it's nice to be able to go, oh, yep, that's an ADHD thing. Okay. And just have that there to know. Mind blowing.
It's nice. It's interesting, and it's something I'm going to be wrapping my brain around, being able to say, yes, that is ADHD. Because I've done I don't want to say I have it, because people who have these things are have real trouble, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And it's always been I have these tendencies, as being how I've referred to it for a long time. I have ADHD tendencies. I have OCD tendencies, etc., etc. And now it's I'm sitting here this afternoon going, okay, apparently I have inattentive ADHD. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? So that's where I am 8 years into my career as a professional author.
Yeah.
With 60 odd books written.
Yep.
Being a high-powered accountant before I was a professional author. It's
boom. But there's the high output is is an
Yeah.
ADHD trait, and so you're a high output person.
And I suspect it's where the whole thing I saw in industry of star performers burn themselves out.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Because they're all ADHD.
Yep, exactly.
Is my suspicion. Anyway.
Oh no, I would agree. Well, and I will also say too, our generation has been going through this like mass awareness that like something ain't right, and like so many people are getting diagnosis. I had a diagnosis when I was a kid, but my mother kind of was like, no, we're not gonna. Shouldn't she kind of push that off to the side? And it probably was a good thing because medication wasn't necessarily super safe back then. And so I forgot about it. I was like 7 or 8 when I got it. And so it was
I don't
like,
remember anything from that age.
No. And then my sister was telling me about, she went back to grad school and she went to a doctor and got diagnosed with ADHD. And she was like, yeah, this is kind of trippy. And like you had it, I should have known. And I'm like, what do you mean I had it? And so we had this whole conversation, called my mom up. What do you mean I had ADHD? I had diagnosis. And so it turned into this whole thing, but everything just started to make sense. The way that I approach the world versus how other people, and it would frustrate me that I didn't understand how do you not see the world? Like, how are you not worried about this random shit back here that is so clearly going to be a problem?
How I went from point A to point B through point C, D, K, Z.
Yes. Yeah. So, we're superheroes. We just have to fully accept it. And it is what it is. But there's so many people who are facing that and coming, to terms with the fact that, they've got ADHD. And I think it's cool to have those conversations with people because.
Like one of the reasons why I mention it is like, it's always been a thing for me of trying to keep. There are things that we don't want to let become stigma.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm suffering from them, and apparently I am, I need to be more open about that because, frankly, at this point in my life, mold in my house is more of a threat to me than the bad opinion of random person number 65 on the internet.
Yeah.
And I say this because I just had to basically demolish a house and rebuild it over the last 2 years because of mold. So,
oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
That was a real big threat to me.
That's a real problem. Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's like I said, it is so not what I thought it was. And I remember a lot of judgment growing. So I grew up in the Midwest, and so there's lots of judgment around anybody with anything. And I totally just assumed it was, something it wasn't. And getting the diagnosis was this really cool eye-opening experience. And I'm like, well, I'm all right. Like I have a pretty cool life, and there's nothing wrong with me. Like ADHD isn't something that's wrong with me. It's just how I approach things. It just is what it is. And the more people realize that it's just that, like, it's the better off it is. And so as a creative person though, I always feel weird telling people about my process because I realize it's totally wrapped up in my ADHD. And I can't help it. Like I can't differentiate those two things. So when people are like, oh, I can sit down for 4 hours and I can pump a manuscript out over 6 months, I'm like, that is weird. Why don't you just do it in 3 weeks? Like, so like I have this.
Why don't you do it in 15-minute chunks? I can't maintain focus for the full 15-minute sprint.
It's like, it's super. So it's so fun to figure out how you work and how you tick, and then your work gets better because of it. Like that's the other thing. So not that you need much improvement because I'm pretty much addicted. Though I haven't. I haven't gotten through everything because again, you're pretty freaking prolific. But it's give me a couple months. But it is one of those
Peacekeepers has a bisexual, demisexual male lead. Or technically pansexual, demisexual lead.
That's the next one. That's what's up next, folks.
And then Scattered Stars Evasion, which does kind of require you to have read at least the first Conviction book for it to make the most sense, has a gay lead. And a 13-year-old who is basically Ace, but 13.
Right. I understand that too. Yeah. Okay, I'm there. That's my next four-way. That's going to be on top of my reading list now. Because
Icebreaker just popped up in a Reddit thread about looking for non-romance focused books with lesbian leads, which made me laugh because this was Icebreaker, which is one of my fantasy books last year, was their example.
That's it's so weird how people take things that you had no intention of creating, and then they like are like, there's fire. Like it's just it's a really it's beautiful.
Icebreaker has a lesbian lead. That's not news to me. I wrote the book.
Right. But it was groundbreaking for them. It was important for them, and that's I'm writing a lesbian lead right now, and they are transgender, essentially android, and it's a whole complicated body swapping thing that happened, but it's so I've got that going on, and I hadn't thought about it in any other, as being weird, but then I had a conversation with somebody who was like, are you putting that out? I'm like, why? I'm like, we're 600 years in the future. Why wouldn't I put out, like, I don't, like, nobody cares that this is what it is. Like, it just, it is what it is. But you're not that. I'm like, I'm a gay person. I know what it's like to be gay. Like, that's probably good enough for what I need. Like, because it's not as like with you, it's not the point, but yeah. So I'm writing a lesbian lead right now, and I didn't know that was not the intention, but she just kind of showed up in the story and was like, hey, I'm taking over. And it just was what it was. So I went with it. So I feel that I love
bisexual women do that.
Yeah. Oh, well, you've got a lot of them in your books, and they're all really badass and powerful, and like, yeah, no, you've got really.
We had the conversation once and worked out that I think I have 2 straight female friends. Everyone else is bi or gay.
Everyone else is bi. Well, I could see that, because again, it's a creative thing, right? It's like creatives.
Birds of a feather flock together, I suppose.
Absolutely. So what's next? So you've got these 4 series you're writing, and that is there an end to sight for specific, like Starship's Mage? Are you just going to keep like
Starship's Mage probably has. So Starship's Mage at this point, I think, is 3 seasons, and it's pretty clear, I think, what the seasons are. And it has at least 1 more season in it.
Okay.
I'm not sure where it goes from there, to be honest. I know what the next few books are, and there are some big question marks in my schedule around what happens to Starship's Mage. Aether Spheres is the one we're leading with Kickstarter. Okay. So Nine-Tailed Star was kickstarted last year and just launched for a broader audience this week, as we're recording this.
Okay.
Raven's Flag is the book I'm working on right now, and that kicks off a 2nd season of Peacekeepers of Soul. And that'll be another 4 or 5 books. And that setting, I think I will continue on with for a bit after that too. And the next one after that is Decoding Confederacy. And I think there's just going to be 1 more book in that. That one was planned and plotted as a trilogy. But I have another trilogy that I'll be writing the first book of later this year. And I mean, experimenting with some standalones like Icebreaker. They're interesting because Icebreaker is, you sit down and you write something that, like, series are great. I'm finding I really like trilogies, but series are a more reliable income stream. I'm certainly
there's something about knowing that you get to dive into something that's going to take you very far, right? And then,
Starship's Mage book still outsells anything else I do.
It's a really good series. I mean, and it is obvious. It's like it was your first series, right? Too, that was out. So it's the flagship, right? And so it's one hell of a flagship too.
No, I've got 1 new series I'm writing this year. I don't remember if it launches this year, but I'm writing it this year. And then I think I have a standalone space military SF scheduled for next year as well. Which is what happens when people yell too much about Space Marines where I can hear them, apparently.
Right.
Because apparently I decided that Space Marines, as they exist in Warhammer 40,000, and the Grand Army of the Republic, as it exists in Star Wars, are both ridiculously unethical applications of bioengineering and cloning technology. And how would you do this ethically and practically?
Well, I guess it depends on the situation. That is the start of the whole thing. Well, I'm excited even more so. That's trippy. You're really, you're writing the stuff that I like to read. You're writing the stuff that I like to, that like right now I've gotten into this beautiful, exciting sci-fi world that I created. And it really, it really was reading Starship's Mage that gave me the spark to say, I can create this thing that is in my, because I was having these dreams about this stuff, and it was that kind of thing, and I couldn't get it out.
Definitely have a few things in my blue sky folder that started as dreams.
I love that. And it's your brains. I know Brandon Sanderson was talking about how, like, in his dreams now, he just like goes into editor mode, and he's like, when the dream starts to not do what he wants it to do, he's like, no, I gotta stop. And then he'll go back and rewrite the dream. And I'm like, that would drive me nuts. Like, I just let me sleep. You know what I mean? But it's yeah. So, but it's, again, you've written these really beautiful series. They're very, very comfortable to get into. They're easy to read, and they're just complex enough that I never feel like I know too far in advance what's coming down. Like the big thing with how the Republic was getting there faster than light travel out of nowhere all of a sudden, and that actually hit me like out of nowhere. I was like, wow, I assumed they basically would have, like, where I thought was happening, what I thought was going on was, I thought that they had discovered the tech that the original, like the artifacts basically from the civilization before, or whatever, and that they were just kind of emulating some sort of alien tech that they didn't even understand. It was the same kind of thing. And then I was like smacked in the face, and it was awesome. And so I didn't see it coming, and that's when I knew, because it got dark all of a sudden, and there was a big shift in the tone of the stories, and I knew that the series was not going to be what I thought it was, and that was it. So I'm always pleasantly surprised with how Starship's Mage books go down. And I will say too, Duchy of Terra is Duchy of Terra. They're the aliens. I know I'm keeping you longer than I said I was, but the aliens that you created in Duchy of Terra are just the idea, just amazing. Just I love, because you hear about that in like all the sci-fi documentaries. You're like, well, this is a possibility, but then you were like, okay, but how would they talk, and how would they communicate to people who weren't that? And it was just awesome. So you get this really cool. There's some badass things that happen and Duchy of Terra. So yeah, all of these books. I'm gonna.
Then I decided how to. Then I made it weird in the last trilogy.
They're not even. Yeah, you have to read, folks. I don't want to give all the good, because there's so many things. Like these are really juicy stories. They're really juicy books. And again, you're gonna pick it up, and you're just gonna start getting through. So if you haven't started, I'm gonna put all of the books linkage down in the videos. Definitely check them out. Where do you send people if they want to follow you and they want to keep up to date on what's coming out? Because again,
right now it's the Facebook page or the website and the mailing list. I don't really have much of an internet presence at the moment. I was on Twitter, and I kind of abandoned it with the current chaos. So there is a fan page, there is an author page on Facebook that is linked to a readers group. But the best way to really be sure that you're getting the updates is to be on the mailing list, which you can join at glynstewart.com.
There you go. glynstewart.com. All right. Thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. I know that you're busy and you're writing, and yeah. No, this was super fun. I have been dancing around for the last week when I get to talk to my favorite author, because you are on the top of you are. And I am not, I have to tell you, I am not an easy guy to please when it comes to especially science fiction, because I grew up with the bar that I grew up with. And I never feel, because like even with Star Trek, like I feel like, okay, this is a little I don't feel that with your books. I really don't. So they're what I go to when I need a break. It's how I relax from my own writing. It's how I relax. You're on the top of my list. I always look for a Glynn Stewart book. I'm always waiting for the next thing to come out. So I was
this week.
I'm gonna get it. I'm totally gonna get it. So everybody check out his stuff. Again, linkage below. Glenn, thank you so much. And hopefully you'll come back on when there's more to talk about, and we'll do this again.
All right.
Darren Sparks vs. the Omniverse is produced and distributed by Satyrs Inc., a queer indie company. For more Darren Sparks, including his current projects, visit www.darrensparks.com. Support the Omniverse by joining Darren on Patreon and get exclusive content, merch, and more. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Darren desperately needs your validation.